one of the greatest outgrowths of the civil rights movement was our people's ability to get these jobs, to work for the government, to work in state, local, municipal, become teachers. My parents, my mother was telling me, when she moved to Denver, they had just started to allow African-American teachers to become part of the teachers union. And so they pay into that for 30 years until they retire. And they, and often, they reap the benefits, but often a fair amount of the amount of money they paid in, because of death and other things, they don't necessarily collect. And so that continues to build in these pension systems. But I think it's important to understand the vast majority of that ends up actually in fixed income and then in equities. And there's a small piece that actually ends up in the alternative space, which is, the asset managers, private equity, venture capital, et cetera. The better performing pieces, but that's a small piece. I think you have to actually look at it at a holistic level and say, what do we really need to do? We really need to look at all of the pension plans and say, how do we get this capital driven into our community? And it has to be done intentional. It has to be being driven into, as you say, where the goats can get it. That actually has to be through credit into our community, so our people can borrow money to grow their businesses, so our people can borrow money to mortgage their houses or to buy a house. That is the primary force that we need to drive through, is into the credit markets. And then we can talk about the alternatives in conjunction. But the vast majority of our community needs access to credit. And if we don't have banks in our community, or the CDFIs and MDIs aren't modernized well enough to actually deliver these sort of loans to our businesses, that's the challenge. You look at today, the federal government has approved in December, Congress approved more than $12 billion for CDFIs and minority banks. It's incumbent upon us to ensure that we modernize those banks and that money gets into our CDFIs and into our communities, so our businesses can access that capital, so that they can reopen, so that they can expand their businesses, so they can digitize, so they can become more enabled to serve what this new economy is going to deliver. That's I call it the critical heavy lift. The other part, the alternatives, sure. Look, there's a vast amount of capital that should be put into the alternative space for folks like myself and others to manage. However, it is critically important that we drive it into the communities so that our people can borrow money at reasonable rates without usurious terms, so they can live their day-to-day lives and own houses and send their kids to school and actually fund their businesses using that form of capital. That's the vast majority of the capital that comes out of those pension systems.